Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today, I would like to introduce you to chapter 8 of the book. The book name was, the chapter's name was Christian Community Schools during the late Ottoman Forum period, which was written by the Selçuk Akşin Somel. For me, it's a very interesting topic. Also, I would like to say this after editor of the Ozdalga, who made a very good job in this Ottoman Empire's culture, history, and another influential intellectuals, which is the book of the late Ottoman society, the intellectual legacy. This book gave me a lot of opportunity to learn this Ottoman Empire's culture. So today my topic is I would like to talk to you like the Ottoman Empire's cultural activities, cultural policies, which is the one of the interesting topic. For example, before I read this chapter, I never talk about like the Ottoman Empire. They have some Christian communities, because before I read this chapter, I was just I was talking like okay, maybe it's some the external part of the policy which came from the outside of Ottoman Empire, such as Europe, Russia's the policy, the influence to this Ottoman Empire. But after I read this chapter, my mind and my eyes were opening again, because they have a lot of historical backgrounds, historical diversities in Ottoman Empire. I was like it was some I didn't think about like internal activities of this Ottoman Empire. Of course, every empire has had some soft power policy and hard power policy, also some political policies. That's why I like to read this empire policies, because my country, we have also empire history. Only few nations established big empires in human history. Some of them is Ottoman Empire and Mongolian Empire. That's why their empires they have a very big history as their land and their diversity. So the book content was first Ottoman Empire's policy on the Ottoman Empire's policy on the Muslim communities and non-Muslim communities. I read about it from the book that Ottoman Empire's non-Muslim communities, they were called like millet, which is under the institutional arrangement of the millet system in the late Ottoman centuries. That's why this millet community Another word is called non-Muslim communities. Also, it's called Christian communities. After Selçuk Akşin Somel, who were considered on this five Christian communities, which were the Greeks, Bulgarians, Orthodox Albanians, and Orthodox Arabs, and Armenians. These five were the biggest communities, I mean the Christian communities during the Ottoman Empire. Actually, they have own cultures, own language, and own religions. During this Ottoman Empire, they have given these opportunities to these Christian communities to follow the rules, follow the religions. It was quite tolerant from the Ottoman perspectives. That's why I was wondering about these situations and these tolerant activities. After I read this, it was quite good management in terms of the political policies among these Christian communities. For me, is one of interesting thing was I was learning from Selçuk Akşin Somel about this Christian communities activities based on four main characters, which were how they established this schools and cultural languages. Also, what was their main purposes of this schools and cultural communities, how it was financed by third parties, such as internal finance or external finance. And finally, I was considering on this Ottoman policies every single communities. It was the main observation from this research paper. So before I go to more details, I was considering on this how was the main external influences and general influence to this Christian communities, their mentalities, the changing the spirits of the religions and any other things. It was quite interesting for me because externally they have some factors influence to their activities and mentally and physically. For example, one of this activity was the European Age of the Enlightenment. It was one of the huge storm in Europe, among the Europe, even in Christian religious territories. This European Enlightenment project influenced to this Ottoman Empire, especially in these Christian communities. Of course, they have a lot of differences between religiously, linguistically, but main thing was the age of the Enlightenment influenced to these communities by national ideology, which is called, we can call it like nationalism. The reality of the Enlightenment in Europe, it was separation between church and state. It's kind of this secular ideology, but it's influenced to Ottoman society quite a different way. Of course, it's a part of the Enlightenment, but more nationalist thoughts came to the Ottoman Empire among these Christian communities. Then it's spread to the hugest policy of minority groups, which is this Christian communities, which become the nationalist and separatist movements in the Ottoman Empire. So another factor was they were financed some foreign factors, financially and culturally. It also gave to some opportunities of the separation. Also, late of the Ottoman Empire, the empire had a lot of challenges, which were administratively. They have lack of administration. They had also some lack of policies, financial problems. All of things influenced to this community's development. So, please let me start Greeks was. Greek was one of the major community in Ottoman Empire. They established their own cultural institutions 1861. It's called Sylegos. To this perspective, it was like non-government organizations. It's like cultural association. After they established this cultural association, they were considering on this own language and ancient Greece, this Hellenizing policies all over this Christian territory, especially this Bulgarian, Balkans, and West Anatolia, from West Anatolia to Black Sea, Trabzon, and Izmir, Ayvalık, and this all over this mostly Christian territory of Ottoman Empire. They influenced the Hellenizing philosophical ideologies and Greek languages. Of course, the main purpose of the Greece was to teach their own languages, also to teach their own religions based on this Hellenic identities. Actually, they were established their own association 1861. They also established another association 1891, which was the Megla idea. It's a Greek ideal. It's one of another Hellenic ideals, language, Greece language center. They also provide some scholarships to young girls and young boys to train them as teachers and instructors. This organization's name was Orient Organization. They provide scholarship by this Orient Organization among these Central Anatolian Orthodox populations. The main aim of this scholarship to prepare the instructors and teachers. All of these activities financed by the most elites and richest caste of the Greece. Mostly it was financed by Greece merchants and traders. Even these merchants financed some schools in remote areas such as mountains, the mountain villages. Actually, before city was established in 1861, they were established 1800. It's before there. 60 years ago, one Xenophon Cultural Association in Trabzon area. They had the same activities and same rules of the late Greece syllabus. They modernize in towns and villages. They provide lectures based on this religion and the culture, linguistic. From the Ottoman policy, from this the point of Ottoman view, the Greece was not a big threat to separatism, separate of the empire. They had some lesser influences comparative to Bulgarian and Albanians. That's why the Ottoman policy was not hard for these Greece communities. But Ottomans refused in 1881 to permit the foundation of the syllabus in Adana because they had some policy to decline Greek language in localities because this Greek activity reached to the local level. The local Muslim people participated in these activities. That's why they, from the Ottoman policy, little bit bewaring this Greek schools. The second one was Orthodox Arab schools. For me, it was one of the interesting subjects. I didn't know about the Arabs, the main territory of the Arab. They were Orthodox, the Christian believers. That's why it was for me it's quite interesting. Actually, this Orthodox Arab territory was like minority of this religious groups, of course. They were located in Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Transjordan areas. The most of these Orthodox churches were monopolized by ethnic Greeks. They had a good relationship with each other. The first modern Orthodox school in Arabic-speaking part of the empire was established, founded in Balamand in 1833. Now it's Tripoli and Lebanon. They mostly intend to learn these Orthodox religious ideologies based on the Arabic language. It was the main purpose to learn Orthodox in Arabic language. They had some several financial opportunities. For example, the one of their uh, financial supporter was their Asad Yakub Hayat, which was the Orthodox Arab businessman who established this primary school 1840s. It was the first primary school. They also established high schools in Damascus, which was opened by Yusuf Haddad, an Orthodox priest also. Another main supporter was there were some Russian Imperial Orthodox Palestinian societies. From the Russian part, they're supporting these Orthodox Arab schools in Ottoman Empire. Even there, Palestinians studied religion, Orthodox ideology in Russia, in St. Petersburg, under the Duke Sergei. It was very interesting part of this chapter. Actually, from Ottoman policy, they didn't strongly take care of the systems because it was not it didn't make any huge problems in Ottoman territory. That's why there were no strong restrictions from the empire. So, third Christian community was the Bulgarian schools. They have a cultural associations such as Greece syllabus. Bulgarian schools first founded in 1835. The local Bulgarian educational initiative was closely related to increasing Slavic reaction to Hellenizing policies of ecumenical patriarchates. This Bulgarian case was quite interesting. They also seem to intend teach the language, Bulgarian language. Also, Greek and Bulgar had some conflicts between each other, especially the language problem conflicts. They are also minimizing, declining the local, the non-Greek tongues in Bulgaria to support their own languages. The primary school was founded in 1835 by Vasily Aprilov, who was also one of the merchants. The Bulgarian schools mostly founded by these different sources financially. For example, some American Protestant missionaries, they were influenced to this Bulgarian Slavic committees. Also in Bulgarian, the cultural and religious centers. For example, another financial sources was pan-Slavic committees, which is located in Russia. They were also supporting Bulgarians very good, very well. Another finance was ecumenical patriarchate, which is the Orthodox religious institutions. Still, today they were doing their activities. American schools established in Samako was particularly important in producing instructors, teachers, especially these teachers and instructors who were prepared by this American Protestant school. They became illegal Bulgarian schools. Also they're doing their activities illegally. Tried to hide from the empire. From Ottoman perspective, from the Ottoman Empire's government, they were bewaring the Bulgarian illegal schools. They had a lot of controls, restrictions against the Bulgarians. It was very clear logically because, for example, if I was like Ottoman Empire's government person, the most of the population who especially try to separate from our empire, I will put on my attention on them hardly. That's why there's same thing happened in Bulgarians. For example, the Bulgarian nationalists, they requested from the government to establish their own church in the 1860s, but government was bewaring them. They were just made them more control on the activities. Then they cancelled it. They didn't recognize this new church, which was the one of the example. This kind of conflicts reached to the huge separatist movements for Bulgarians. Also, it influenced by Ottoman and Russian war, which was 1877 to 78. This war was influenced to Bulgarian separatist and nationalist movements. They were supporting the Russians. That's why it became two nations in the huge conflicts. The fourth school was Albanian schools. Actually, Albanian people were peasants and tribal structure conditions. They were living in these conditions. Comparative to Greeks and Bulgarians, they had much not big interest such these countries, such these communities, because most of them were mixed with Turkish people culturally and religiously. Most of Bulgarian schools, Albanian people, for example, half of them are Muslim, half of them non-Muslims. That's why they were not hurry up to establish their own schools comparative to Greece and Bulgarians. Their first attempt to create national alphabet in 1840s. Initiatives of the Albanian educational system began in 1870s. It's quite late. It was very late compared to other two communities. It seems to me like Albanian and Ottoman were Turkish people, the most shared culture and mixed ethnics. Those first Albanian primary school was founded late in 1887. The main purpose was of of course, the Albanian languages. Some priests and some traders, merchants were supported in this education, especially on this Albanian language. Some also wealthy Albanian landowners, mainly they were Muslim. They were often members of Ottoman ruling elite and associated themselves with Ottoman state. Despite these restrictive conditions, individual attempts were made by some priests and intellectuals to offer education in Albanian language. Albanian primary school was founded in 1887. Ottoman administration authorized the school provided it accepted only Christian children. But Albanian communities, Christian communities, they involved in also Muslim children. They had no restriction to Muslim children. That's why it was against their Ottoman Empire's policy. Those empire closed these schools 1902. The last community was the Armenian community. The Armenian community is also one of the big Orthodox communities. They were living in the interesting cases similar to Albania. They established the first school in 1870s. The community used it in Turkish. Most of this Armenian people also. Armenian and Turkish, they were mixed together, same as Albanians, culturally, also religionally, some of them Muslim and some of them non-Muslim. Especially they were mixed with Turkish and Kurdish people. They were spoken usually in Turkish language. Only just some well-educated Albanians were spoken in Armenian language, Armenians. They had some interesting schools, which were these wandering teachers, some tribal and nomadic teachers under these few monasteries. The early 19th century, the schools were founded through the private initiatives in towns such as Izmir, Tokat, Erzurum, and Trabzon. They also found cultural associations, which is the similar as Greek synagogues. Armenian schools founded by the different merchants, traders. The main aim was also to teach the own language, Armenian language, to the children, but it became one of the big separatist movements. For example, they established the one cultural association which called Andsnever in Istanbul. Main purpose of this association to teaching Armenian languages. But beside this, another association they were also established, which is Araraten Association. there were more active association from these eastern Anatolia towns such as Van, Erzurum, and Mamurotulets, Tlazis. They established own schools there. Armenia was one of the worst cases to use these schools as a radical movement, especially a radical separatist movement, based on the nationalist idea. The former students in Van from this Araratan association, they become secret nationalist organization which called Armeniakan in 1885. They mostly did their activities based on this separatist and nationalist movements. They were also influenced by this radical Russian revolutionary thinkers. Those that tried to separate from the empire, and most of these associations, schools did the activity under the illegal conditions. Mostly these Armenian schools, associations financed by Russians, Russian businessmen, Russian Armenian businessmen, Armenian owned businessmen, merchants. They had a lot of donations from the Russia, especially this Russian Armenian businessmen. Founding for this donation dedicated to found schools in Erzurum, Van, and Mamrulatatis. Of course, Ottoman policy didn't support them because of the illegal activities. In terms of these Armenian communities, some potential dangerous influence to the empire. For example, events of Kumkapi in 1890s, they provided Ottoman government with pretext to close down those Armenian schools in eastern Anatolia. They were considered as centers of separatist activities. Finally, in 1893, the General Union of Armenian Schools was abolished. This kind of conflicts between empire and Armenian separatist movements, they pushed two nations, the hugest massacres. It was a very bad history between two nations. The Ottoman policy was little bit bewailing, it's not little bit, extremely bewailing this Armenian schools. So now I would like to introduce you next part of my presentation, which is the Ottoman policy. What was the main Ottoman policy in these schools, Christian communities? And main legal environment was Edict of Reform, which was approved in 1856. This Edict of Reform gave the good opportunities to Muslim and non-Muslim people living together. Based on this reform, most of communities established their own language schools and religious schools. Ethnic reform was a main legal environment at that time. After that, non-Muslim communities, schools actually controlled by the Supreme Party and Public Education Ministry. In 1869, they approved some regulations between non-Muslim schools and public education ministry. This regulation, according to this law, the public morality and state policy will be center of these schools, Christian community schools. According to this regulation, they will get the permission from government. Also, they need to report the reports to the government. From the government side, they will make a control on these schools. They will supervise these schools, these Christian communities, follow the empire's rules. Obviously, they had a very good legal environment, each other. But why this separatist movement, nationalist movements came from? As I told you before, came from European Enlightenment ideologies and nationalist ideology among the Europe influenced to this Ottoman Empire's Christian community. From the Ottoman perspective, they had some difficulties and challenges to control over this Christian community schools. After claiming that, they had the main two challenges for Ottoman society, which were the first, lack of adequate resource, insufficient resources in terms of finance, bureaucracy to control over them. It influenced to this one of the influential factor of these illegal activities of Christian community schools. Another main factor was the shortcomings of local provincial administration system. Administratively, they had also problems, which is influenced to this separatist organizations easily established based on this Christian community schools. And however, this government, they're doing the activities naturally, but sometimes they exaggerated, overwhelmed the laws, restrictions over these Christian community schools. For example, some Greek schools, Greek colleges complained about Bulgarian and Albanian illegal activities to the government. Government directly closed down this numerous of Bulgarian schools. It makes this Bulgarian communities some disadvantages, and they were against the empire's governments. It pushes them to these situations. However, this Ottoman point of the view, government were somehow some challenges, but they didn't control the separatist movements fully controlled. They had a lot of difficulties came from the separatist movements and nationalist movements. So let's turn to the conclusions. Of course, first, it had some government, Ottoman Empire had some good possibilities and good legal environment to the minorities of Christian communities to establish their own schools. But two external and internal factors influenced to this schools activities go to the illegally, which was external activity. European Enlightenment process came to the Ottoman Empire's Christian community by nationalist ideology. Another factor was internal factor. Based on this nationalist and separatist idea, they tried to be separate Ottoman empires. They had also some external possibilities. For example, the funds and supports came from American Protestant agencies, came from Russia, came from these other Orthodox institutions abroad. It influenced to the separatist ideologies. Another main point was nationalism led to the politicization of the community schools. It divided traditionally integral structures of religious communities and opened way of transformation of communities into nations. Finally, I observed that it became more difficulties both Ottoman government and Christian communities. From one side, the Ottomans government, they tried to unite, stable these Christian communities under the empire. From these Christian community sides, they were completely tried to separate Ottoman Empire and to establish their own countries based on this nationalism. These two powers never meet each other. That's why this, from the Ottoman perspective, this Christian community schools and associations became a bad result of empire's stability. Another view of Christian communities, it may be the good opportunities for them to establish their own countries and nations. Thank you very much for your consideration.